Don't touch that stitch. Naomi Brooks's voice cut through the private medical suite so sharply that 20 of the best surgeons in Chicago seemed to stop breathing at once. Until that moment, nobody had noticed the maid standing near the linen cart. Nobody ever did. She was 31, dressed in a plain gray housekeeping uniform, her dark hands wrapped around a stack of fresh white sheets while machines hummed softly around the most feared man in the city. Vincent Callahan lay beneath those sheets, pale and exhausted, surrounded by specialists whose degrees covered entire walls and whose fees could have bought Naomi's apartment building twice over. 3 weeks earlier, Vincent had walked through his mansion with the controlled confidence of a man accustomed to doors opening before he reached them. Now even lifting his head required effort. Dr. Andrew Whitmore stood beside the bed studying the surgical site while 2 nurses prepared fresh instruments. Every test had produced another question. Every treatment had bought Vincent hours instead of answers. 20 surgeons had reviewed his case. 20 brilliant minds had examined scans, blood work, medication charts, and every measurable detail of his recovery. Still, Vincent was getting weaker. Whitmore finally reached toward the remaining stitch. "Stop." Naomi said it again, quieter this time. Whitmore turned. His expression hardened when he realized who had interrupted him. "Excuse me." Naomi's fingers tightened around the sheets. She knew the rules of the Callahan estate. Staff entered quietly, worked quietly, and disappeared quietly. A maid did not interrupt a surgeon. She certainly did not interrupt 20 of them while they were treating Vincent Callahan. But Naomi had seen something. A tiny discoloration clung to the surgical thread, barely visible beneath the bright examination lights. Everyone else had been watching Vincent's monitors. Naomi had been watching the thing they were about to throw away. "I said don't touch it yet." Several doctors exchanged looks. One frowned. Another glanced toward the door as though security should already be removing her. Whitmore straightened, his white coat perfectly pressed despite the long night. "Ms. Brooks, this is a medical procedure. Please return to your duties." Naomi swallowed. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it beneath her uniform, but her eyes remained fixed on the stitch. Something about it had pulled an old memory from a part of her life she had spent years trying to bury. The color, the residue, the way the surrounding irritation seemed strangely concentrated along the thread instead of spreading naturally across the wound. She could be wrong. She desperately wanted to be wrong. "Naomi." Marcus Hale, Vincent's chief of security, stepped closer. His voice carried a warning. "You need to leave." Naomi finally looked at him. "Not until they test that thread." The room went still. Whitmore gave a short, disbelieving breath. 20 surgeons have examined Mr. Callahan. What exactly do you think you've discovered while changing his sheets? The words landed exactly as intended. Naomi felt every pair of eyes turn toward her gray uniform, her inexpensive shoes, the linen still trapped between her hands. She was the poorest person in the room, the least educated person they believed was in the room, the easiest person to dismiss. Her hands trembled once. Then they became steady. "You don't have to believe me," she said. "But if you remove that stitch before testing it, you may destroy the only evidence explaining why he keeps getting worse." Whitmore's expression changed. Marcus stopped moving, and from the bed came a weak voice no one in Chicago was accustomed to ignoring. "Evidence of what?" Vincent asked. Naomi met his eyes for the first time since she had entered his house. "That this may not be a complication, Mr. Callahan." She looked back at the thread. Someone may have put something on that stitch. 3 weeks earlier, Naomi Brooks had been almost invisible inside the Callahan estate, and she had worked hard to keep it that way. She arrived every morning before 7, entered through the staff door beside the service garage, tied back her hair, checked the housekeeping schedule, and moved quietly through a mansion where a single chandelier probably cost more than everything she owned. The house sat behind iron gates on several acres outside Chicago, all pale stone, dark oak, polished marble, and windows tall enough to make the people beneath them seem small. Naomi had learned quickly that wealth had its own sounds. Expensive shoes clicked differently against marble. Tailored coats whispered instead of rustled. Men carrying important secrets lowered their voices whenever Vincent Callahan entered a room. Naomi heard those sounds every day, yet almost nobody asked what she heard, because almost nobody remembered she was there. Vincent was no exception. Their first real encounter lasted perhaps 8 seconds. He stepped from his study while Naomi was polishing a narrow table in the hallway. She moved aside immediately. He gave her a brief nod and continued walking with Marcus Hale beside him. Naomi watched them disappear around the corner, then returned to the table. That was how people like Vincent Callahan treated people like her. Not cruelly. Somehow, that would have been easier to recognize. They simply looked through her. Naomi needed the job too badly to resent it openly. Her apartment rent was overdue, her old sedan needed repairs, and nearly every dollar left after groceries went toward debts she never discussed with the other staff. So she cleaned fingerprints from glass doors, replaced towels in guest bathrooms, carried laundry through rooms larger than her entire apartment, and kept her history locked behind a calm expression. But Naomi noticed things. She noticed which housekeeper favored her left knee when climbing stairs. She noticed when Vincent stopped drinking the coffee left outside his study because someone had changed the brand. She noticed that Marcus checked every exterior door twice before midnight. She noticed which visitors treated the staff politely and which ones became different people when they believed no one important was watching. Observation had once belonged to another life, a life Naomi rarely allowed herself to remember. Now it simply helped her survive. Then Vincent returned home after an emergency surgery, and the rhythm of the estate changed overnight. The West Wing became a private recovery area. Medical equipment arrived in unmarked vans. Specialists came through the front entrance carrying leather cases and serious expressions. Staff members were instructed to stay away unless specifically assigned. Naomi followed every rule. For the first few days, she saw Vincent only from a distance. The man who once crossed a room like he owned every inch of air inside it now moved slowly, supported by Marcus, his face drained of its usual certainty. Naomi told herself not to stare. She had work to do, but each morning brought more doctors. Each night left more lights burning in the West Wing. Then, on the sixth day, Naomi carried fresh linens past the private medical suite and heard Dr. Andrew Whitmore speaking behind a partially closed door. His voice was low, controlled, but one sentence stopped her in the hallway. The surgery was successful, so something else is happening. Naomi stood perfectly still. Inside, another doctor answered. Then why is he getting worse? Naomi lowered her eyes to the white sheets in her arms. For reasons she could not yet explain, an old uneasiness stirred inside her. Something about this house had changed, and for the first time since arriving, being invisible meant Naomi might be seeing what everyone else was too busy to notice. By the eighth day, the West Wing no longer felt like part of a mansion. It had become a place of hushed voices, rolling equipment, untouched coffee, and specialists arriving with confidence only to leave wearing the same troubled expression. Vincent Callahan had been examined by surgeons from Chicago, Boston, New York, Cleveland, and Houston. Some specialized in postoperative complications. Others had built careers around infections, immune reactions, and rare conditions most people could barely pronounce. Vincent had the money to bring almost anyone to his bedside, and Marcus Hale used that money without hesitation. Private cars waited at the airport. Hotel suites were reserved. Records were transmitted within minutes. Nothing was too expensive if it produced an answer. Yet every answer seemed to disappear the moment Vincent's condition worsened again. His surgery had healed well enough to satisfy the original team. His scans showed nothing that explained the steady decline. Medication was adjusted. Blood work was repeated. Samples were sent to independent laboratories. One theory replaced another until the whiteboard in the adjoining consultation room looked like a map leading everywhere except the truth. Naomi watched all of it from the edges. She carried towels past physicians speaking into phones. She collected coffee cups abandoned beside medical journals. She polished the hallway table while two specialists quietly disagreed about whether they were dealing with an unusual reaction or something they had simply failed to identify. Nobody lowered their voices around her anymore. Naomi was furniture to them. That invisibility gave her pieces of the puzzle without giving her permission to assemble them. On the 10th morning, Vincent attempted to conduct business from bed. Naomi entered briefly with fresh water and found him sitting upright, a dark robe over his shoulders, documents spread across a portable table. Marcus stood nearby reading from a folder. Vincent looked exhausted, but his voice still carried command. Continue. Marcus hesitated. You need rest. Vincent lifted his eyes. I did not ask what I need. Naomi placed the water down without making a sound. For 1 second, Vincent looked at her. There was frustration in his face, but something else lived beneath it now. Fear. He quickly looked away. Naomi understood why. Powerful men could admit anger. They could admit exhaustion. Fear was different. By that afternoon, 3 more specialists arrived. By evening, another conference filled the consultation room. Naomi was replacing flowers in the hallway when she heard Whitmore speak. "We have reviewed everything." Silence followed. "Then review it again," Marcus said. "We have." Whitmore sounded older than he had a week earlier. "Every scan, every medication, every culture, every surgical note. There are 20 surgeons connected to this case," Marcus replied. "One of you must have an answer." Nobody answered him. Naomi's hand stopped above the vase. Through the narrow opening of the door, she could see physicians seated around the table, expensive glasses resting. Beside untouched folders, these were people accustomed to solving problems. Tonight, they looked defeated by one. Whitmore finally removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We are running out of options." The words seemed to drain the air from the hallway. Naomi looked toward Vincent's closed door. Hours later, after most of the consultants had left, she was assigned to replace the linens in the recovery room adjoining his suite. A stainless steel tray sat near the disposal container, waiting to be cleared by medical staff. Naomi would normally have walked past it. Instead, something caught the light. A short piece of surgical thread lay against white gauze. Naomi slowed. Her breathing changed. There was a faint discoloration along the thread, subtle enough to disappear unless the light struck it from the side. She stared at it, and suddenly the mansion around her seemed very far away. Somewhere inside a memory she had spent years avoiding. Naomi had seen something disturbingly similar before. Naomi did not touch the thread. That was the first thing her old instincts told her. She stood beside the stainless steel tray with her hands at her sides, staring at the faint discoloration while the medical suite hummed quietly behind her. The mark was subtle, almost nothing, a pale residue where the surgical material should have looked clean and uniform. She leaned closer without disturbing it. For several seconds, she forgot the linen cart, the mansion, even Vincent Callahan sleeping beyond the adjoining door. She remembered fluorescent lights from another building, another life, and a voice telling her that when something looked wrong, the worst mistake was deciding it could not matter simply because it was small. Naomi stepped into the hallway and found a young physician reviewing notes near the consultation room. "Doctor." He barely looked up. "Yes. There is something on one of the removed stitches." His eyes remained on the chart. "The nursing team will dispose of the used materials. I do not think they should dispose of this one." That earned her a glance. His attention moved from her face to the housekeeping uniform, then back to the chart. "Thank you. We will handle it." Naomi felt the dismissal immediately. Polite. Efficient. Final. She returned to the room, but the uneasiness followed her. 20 minutes later, another physician entered to check equipment. Naomi tried again. "Could someone test that thread before it is discarded?" The woman frowned. "Why? There is residue on it." The physician glanced toward the tray from several feet away. "Postoperative material can discolor." "I know." The words escaped before Naomi could stop them. The physician looked at her more carefully now. "You know?" Naomi hesitated. Years of keeping her past buried pressed against the back of her throat. "I have seen something similar." "Where?" Naomi lowered her eyes. "A long time ago." The physician gave a tired sigh. "Ms. Brooks, everyone is under pressure. Please let the medical team do its work." By evening, the thread was gone from the tray. Naomi's stomach tightened until she discovered it had only been transferred to a sealed specimen container. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she noticed the irritation around Vincent's remaining sutures looked strangely concentrated. The surrounding skin was not behaving the way she remembered ordinary healing behaving. She said nothing that night. The next morning, Vincent's condition worsened again. More specialists gathered. Naomi watched Whitmore enter the suite with the determined expression of a man who had decided uncertainty itself was the enemy. She waited outside until he emerged. "Dr. Whitmore." He stopped. "What is it?" "Please test the removed surgical thread." His face tightened. "Who told you to involve yourself in this case?" "Nobody." "Then do not. Something is wrong with it." Whitmore stared at her. "You clean these rooms. We treat the patient." Naomi felt the words strike deeper than she wanted them to. Around them, Two nurses went quiet. Marcus stood farther down the hall, watching. Naomi could have apologized. She could have lowered her head and returned to her cart. That was what everyone expected. Instead, she held Whitmore's gaze. Then treat him, she said softly. But test the thread first. Whitmore's jaw hardened. That is enough. Naomi stepped back, but her eyes moved toward Vincent's door. She knew she had crossed a line. What frightened her was no longer the possibility of losing her job. It was the possibility that everyone with the authority to listen had already decided she had nothing worth hearing. That night, Naomi could not sleep. She sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment with a cup of coffee growing cold between her hands, staring at nothing while a memory she had buried for years slowly returned. Before overdue rent, before housekeeping uniforms, before she learned how easily people could stop seeing you, Naomi had worked as a patient care technician at a teaching hospital on the south side of Chicago. She had never been a physician, and she had never pretended to be one. Her job had been quieter. She changed bedding, transported patients, recorded basic observations, prepared rooms, and spent long hours close enough to notice the details that hurried people sometimes missed. Naomi had planned to continue her education. She took evening classes at a community college, saved every extra dollar, and imagined becoming a registered nurse someday. Then her mother became seriously ill. Tuition money became grocery money. Savings became medical bills. Naomi left school, picked up more work, and told herself she would return when life became easier. Life never did, but one memory from the hospital stayed with her. A patient recovering after surgery had developed an unusual irritation that seemed concentrated around the surgical material. Naomi remembered a nurse educator holding a removed sample beneath a bright examination lamp and telling the students nearby not to dismiss what their eyes were showing them. The material had been contaminated by a substance that should never have been there. The exact circumstances were different, and Naomi knew memory was not proof. Still, the faint residue she had seen at the Callahan estate had awakened that lesson with frightening clarity. Look first. Assume later. The next morning, Naomi arrived before sunrise. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows while the mansion remained unusually quiet. She entered the west wing to replace towels and found Dr. Claire Bennett alone at a counter reviewing Vincent's latest laboratory results. Claire was younger than most of the specialists and one of the few who regularly thanked the housekeeping staff. Naomi stopped several feet away. Dr. Bennett, may I ask you something? Claire looked up. Of course. The specimen container from yesterday. The one with the removed thread. Is it still here? Claire studied her face. Why does that matter so much to you? Naomi hesitated, then told her. Not everything. Just enough. She explained the hospital job, the nursing classes she never finished, and the old case that had taught her to pay attention to unusual residue on medical materials. Claire listened without interrupting. When Naomi finished, the room was silent except for the rain. You understand that what you saw years ago does not mean the same thing is happening here, Claire said. Yes. And you cannot identify a substance by looking at it. I know. Naomi's voice remained steady. That is why I keep asking someone to test it. Something changed in Claire's expression. Not belief. Respect. The sample has not been discarded, she said. Naomi released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Then footsteps approached from the hallway. Whitmore entered with Marcus behind him, and the tension returned immediately. Whitmore looked from Claire to Naomi. Why is she here? Before Naomi could answer, Claire closed the folder in front of her. Because she noticed something we did not. Whitmore's expression cooled. We have already discussed this. No, Claire said quietly. You dismissed it. That is not the same thing. Marcus looked toward Naomi for several seconds. Beyond the closed door, Vincent's monitors continued their soft mechanical rhythm. Naomi thought about how strange life could be. Years ago, she had surrendered a dream because her family needed her. Now the knowledge left behind by that unfinished dream might matter more than anyone in this mansion understood. Whitmore looked at Claire as though she had challenged something larger than his medical judgment. We are treating a critically ill patient, not investigating theories. From the housekeeping staff, Claire did not move. Then testing the sample should settle it. Marcus Hale stepped between them before Whitmore could answer. How long? Claire glanced toward the sealed specimen container. A preliminary analysis could come back quickly if the laboratory prioritizes it. Then prioritize it. Marcus reached for his phone. Whitmore exhaled slowly. We are wasting time. From behind the closed door came the soft electronic rhythm of Vincent's monitors, followed by the quiet movement of a nurse. Naomi looked toward the sound. Something tightened in her chest. Maybe, she said. Whitmore turned toward her. Naomi continued before fear could silence her. Maybe I am completely wrong. I hope I am. But if I am wrong, the test costs you a little time. If I am right, ignoring it could cost Mr. Callahan much more. Whitmore's expression hardened. You are not qualified to make that judgment. I did not make a diagnosis. Her voice was quiet, but it no longer trembled. I asked you to test something unusual. The door opened. A nurse stepped into the hallway. Mr. Callahan is awake. Marcus immediately entered, followed by Whitmore and Claire. Naomi remained outside. She had already crossed enough boundaries. Then Vincent's voice came from inside, weak but unmistakable. Where is the woman? Marcus stopped. Naomi. The maid. Naomi felt every eye turn toward her. She stepped into the room. Vincent looked smaller than the man she remembered passing in the hallway weeks earlier, but his gaze remained sharp. You keep bothering my doctors. Under different circumstances, the sentence might have sounded threatening. Naomi heard exhaustion instead. Yes, sir. Why? Whitmore started to speak. Mr. Callahan, this is unnecessary. Vincent lifted one hand slightly, and Whitmore stopped. His eyes returned to Naomi. I asked her. Naomi approached the bed, but kept several feet between them. I saw something on the surgical thread that was removed yesterday. I have seen a similar kind of residue before. You are a doctor? No, sir. A nurse? Naomi paused. No. I once worked as a patient care technician, and I studied toward nursing before I had to leave school. Vincent watched her carefully. So 20 surgeons missed something a former technician found. The room became painfully quiet. Naomi shook her head. I do not know what they missed. She glanced toward Whitmore, then Claire. And I do not know what the substance is, or whether it caused anything. That is exactly why the thread needs to be tested. Vincent's eyes narrowed slightly. You are willing to stand in this room and tell all these people they could be wrong? Naomi looked around at the white coats, the polished equipment, the faces that had barely acknowledged her existence days earlier. Then she looked back at him. No, sir. I am asking them to be willing to find out. For several seconds, Vincent said nothing. Marcus waited. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Claire remained perfectly still. Then Vincent spoke. Test it. Whitmore stepped forward. Vincent, we have other priorities. Then handle those too. His voice was faint, but the authority behind it had returned. Test the thread. Claire picked up the sealed container. As she turned toward the door, Vincent looked at Naomi again. And until we know what is happening, nobody throws away anything removed from this room. Naomi nodded. Yes, sir. Whitmore stared at her, clearly unhappy, but he said nothing. Claire disappeared down the hallway with the specimen. Naomi started to follow, believing her part was finished. Naomi. She froze. It was the first time Vincent Callahan had ever called her by name. She turned. His eyes held hers. If there is something else you notice, you tell me. Naomi gave a small nod. I will. Outside, Claire was already arranging the urgent laboratory analysis. Inside the suite, nobody laughed, nobody dismissed the maid, and nobody understood yet how much the next report was about to change. The laboratory called 90 minutes later. By then, the gray morning had brightened over the Callahan estate, but nobody in the West Wing seemed to notice. Vincent rested beneath crisp white sheets while Whitmore reviewed another set of results and Marcus stood near the window with his phone in his hand. Naomi had returned to work because there was nothing else she was permitted to do. She was polishing the long walnut table outside the consultation room when Claire Bennett appeared at the far end of the hallway carrying a sealed report. Claire usually walked quickly. This time, she moved slowly. Naomi stopped polishing. Marcus noticed Claire through the open doorway and stepped into the hall. What did they find? Claire looked toward Naomi before answering. We need everyone in the room. Minutes later, the specialists gathered around Vincent's bed. Naomi remained near the doorway until Vincent saw her. Come in. Whitmore glanced at her, but said nothing. Claire placed the report on the table. The laboratory found a foreign chemical residue on the removed surgical thread. Silence settled across the room. Whitmore reached for the report. His eyes moved rapidly across the page, then returned to the beginning as if reading it twice might change the words. Could this have come from routine preparation? Marcus asked. Claire shook her head. The laboratory does not believe so. Vincent's face remained still. What does that mean? Claire chose her words carefully. It means the thread was exposed to something that should not have been there. We need additional testing to identify everything precisely, but the finding is significant enough that we should treat the remaining surgical material as potentially contaminated and preserve it for analysis. Whitmore lowered the report. The confidence that had surrounded him for days had disappeared. We need to review the entire supply chain. Marcus's expression changed immediately. Supply chain? Where the material came from, who handled it, when it entered the procedure, and whether anything else from the same batch was used. Vincent turned his head toward Naomi. She had expected satisfaction. Instead, she felt cold. Being right meant something was terribly wrong. You saw this from across the room? He asked. I saw that it looked unusual, Naomi replied. The laboratory found the rest. Vincent studied her for a long moment. Then Whitmore spoke, quieter than before. Ms. Brooks. Naomi looked at him. He seemed to struggle with the next sentence. I should have ordered the test when you first raised the concern. Nobody moved. Naomi could have reminded him of every dismissive word. She could have made him feel the humiliation she had felt in that hallway. Instead, she said, what matters is that you tested it. Whitmore's eyes dropped briefly. Vincent noticed. So did everyone else. Marcus began issuing instructions to preserve medical records and document everyone who had access to Vincent's recovery supplies. Claire arranged for further analysis while the remaining physicians reconsidered the case through an entirely different lens. The mystery had changed shape. They were no longer asking only why Vincent was failing to recover. They were asking how something foreign had reached material used in his care. Naomi quietly stepped backward, intending to leave them to their work. Then she saw Marcus place a printed access log on the table. A list of names ran down the page. Doctors, nurses, medical couriers, security personnel, household staff. Naomi's eyes passed over them once, then stopped. One name meant nothing to her, but the time printed beside it did. She remembered that night. She remembered carrying towels past the recovery room shortly after midnight. And she remembered seeing someone walk out who, according to the schedule Naomi had been given, was never supposed to be there. Naomi leaned closer to the access log. The entry showed 12:17 in the morning, 2 nights after Vincent returned from surgery. The name beside it was Dr. Ethan Mercer, listed as an outside postoperative consultant. Naomi remembered the time because she had been carrying fresh towels toward the guest bathrooms when a man in a white coat stepped from the recovery room. At the time, nothing about him seemed important. He carried a slim medical case, nodded once as he passed her, and continued toward the service elevator instead of the main staircase. Naomi had assumed he belonged there. Everyone else had too. That was the advantage of a white coat in a house full of doctors. Nobody asked questions. Marcus, Naomi said quietly. Conversation stopped. Marcus looked up. What? She pointed toward the entry. Who is Ethan Mercer? Whitmore moved beside him. I do not recognize the name. Claire shook her head. Neither do I. Marcus immediately opened a digital schedule on his phone. His expression became still. There was no outside consultant scheduled at 12:17. Naomi felt the room tighten around her. Vincent watched her from the bed. You saw him? Yes, sir. I did not know who he was. I thought he was part of the medical team. Marcus asked her to describe what she remembered. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. Medium height. Gray hair at the temples. Wire-framed glasses. Navy tie. A small silver medical case. She remembered his shoes most clearly because they had left faint rain marks on the polished floor, and she had cleaned them afterward. Marcus turned toward one of his security staff. Check the hallway cameras from that night. Several minutes passed before a tablet was brought into the room. The recording showed Naomi pushing her linen cart down the hallway. Then another figure appeared near the recovery suite. His face was partly turned away, but his clothing matched her memory. He entered the restricted area and emerged several minutes later. Marcus searched the authorized visitor records again. Nothing. Whitmore looked genuinely unsettled. How did nobody challenge him? Naomi answered before she could stop herself. Because he looked like someone people expected to belong there. The sentence landed heavily. Vincent's eyes moved from the screen to Naomi's gray uniform. He understood the other half without her saying it. She had spent weeks looking like someone people expected not to matter. Marcus ordered the security team to preserve every record connected to the unidentified visitor and contact the appropriate authorities. No accusations were made. There was not enough evidence for that. But there was enough to investigate. Then Claire noticed something else. If someone had unauthorized access to the recovery room, we need to inspect every remaining medical supply that was stored there. The room changed instantly. Sealed packages were isolated for professional testing. Inventory numbers were compared. Records were checked against delivery times. Naomi stayed out of the medical work, but she watched. That was what she had always done. Then she remembered something else. There was another package. Marcus turned. What package? The morning after I saw that man. A small medical delivery was sitting beside the service elevator. I moved it onto the supply cart because I thought someone had left it there by mistake. Whitmore stared at her. Where did it go? Naomi's face lost color. Into this wing. Claire immediately checked the inventory. One package from that morning had no matching delivery record. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The mystery was no longer hidden inside Vincent's body. It was moving backward through the mansion, through overlooked timestamps, forgotten packages, and quiet hallways. And the person reconstructing those moments was the woman everyone had assumed was invisible. The investigation lasted 4 days, but Vincent began recovering before the answers were complete. Once the remaining surgical materials were removed from use and his medical team adjusted his care, the unexplained decline finally slowed. His strength returned gradually. First, he could sit beside the tall bedroom windows for 20 minutes. Then he could walk across the room with assistance. By the end of the week, he was conducting short meetings from his study again, although Claire Bennett made it clear that even Vincent Callahan could not negotiate with a recovery schedule. The unidentified visitor was turned over to the proper authorities for investigation, along with security recordings, access records, and the unregistered medical package. Marcus discovered that the name Ethan Mercer did not match any physician approved to enter the estate. The laboratory findings gave investigators another trail to follow, but Vincent refused to let speculation become accusation. Naomi respected that. She had never claimed to know who was responsible. She had only noticed what others had overlooked. 2 weeks later, Vincent asked every senior member of the household staff and several members of the medical team to gather in the main library. Naomi arrived last, still wearing her gray housekeeping uniform because she had been cleaning the east guest rooms when Marcus found her. Whitmore stood near the fireplace. Claire was beside him. Marcus waited near Vincent's desk. Naomi quietly moved toward the back of the room, where staff members usually stood when important people were speaking. No, Vincent said. Every head turned. He was standing beside the desk in a charcoal suit, thinner than before, but steady. His eyes settled on Naomi. Come here. Naomi crossed the room slowly. She stopped several feet from him. Vincent looked around at the physicians, security personnel, and household employees who had once passed Naomi in hallways without learning her name. Then he extended his hand. Naomi Brooks. She stared at his hand for half a second before taking it. The woman who saved my life. The library became completely silent. Naomi felt heat rise into her face. Mr. Callahan, the doctor saved your life. I only noticed something. 20 specialists looked at my case, Vincent replied. You noticed what nobody else stopped to examine. Whitmore stepped forward. She is right about one thing. The medical team treated you. But she was also right when she asked us to test the material, and I was wrong to dismiss her because of the uniform she was wearing. Naomi looked at him. His apology contained no excuse. That mattered more than she expected. Vincent reached for an envelope on the desk. I want to compensate you. Naomi did not take it. Sir, I appreciate that, but money is not what I want from this. Vincent raised an eyebrow. Then tell me what is. Naomi looked around the library. She saw housekeepers, drivers, security staff, physicians, and executives standing beneath carved wood ceilings and shelves filled with books most of them would never have permission to touch. Next time someone without a title notices something important, listen before deciding they have nothing worth saying. Vincent lowered the envelope. For several seconds, he simply looked at her. Then he nodded. Done. The following morning, Naomi arrived at 7 as usual. She crossed the marble entrance hall carrying fresh towels when Whitmore approached from the opposite direction. Months earlier, he might have walked past without noticing her. This time he stopped at the doorway, opened it, and stepped aside. Good morning, Naomi. She smiled. Good morning, doctor. She walked through, her shoes quiet against the marble. The mansion looked exactly the same. The chandeliers still glittered. The floors still reflected the morning light. Vincent Callahan was still powerful, and Naomi Brooks was still the woman who had once cleaned rooms nobody believed she understood. But something fundamental had changed. They had finally learned her name. And Vincent had learned that intelligence does not always enter the room wearing a white coat.